Hello, my name is Rickard, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to recreate this composite in Photoshop. In a couple of weeks, I'm doing a live compositing workshop with members of the Nuclei Academy and Masterclass, where I'm going to walk you through a full project from beginning to end. Now, that is an advanced compositing workshop, and if you want to join it, I have included a link to it in the description of this video. However, what I wanted to do in this tutorial is give you a primer on compositing in Photoshop. We're going to start with the user interface for Photoshop. What are the tools that you need for compositing? And then we're going to do this composite from beginning to end as I walk you through what the tools are, where to find them, and what are the most important tools that you need for compositing. Now, if you want to follow along, I have included the images that I use in a link in the description of this video. Go ahead, download those, and then let's dive into Photoshop. And when you open Photoshop, you're going to get the splash screen, and then you're going to arrive at the home screen. You can pretty much ignore everything here. Obviously, if you want to explore it, you can. And the Learn tab here does have quite a few interactive tutorials which will help you learn Photoshop. But if you're already somewhat familiar with Photoshop, or you just want to dive right in, the two most important buttons are New, File, and Open. So New File will create a blank Photoshop document, and Open will allow you to open an existing image file or an existing Photoshop file. Photoshop does support most image formats, so if you have a photo that you've either downloaded or taken with a digital camera, you're going to be able to open it inside of Photoshop. I'm going to go ahead and click Open, and this is the assets for this tutorial. We're going to go ahead and take this one, which is an image from Unsplash. We're going to go ahead and open it. All right, so now we are inside the user interface of Photoshop. I'm going to give you kind of a quick orientation if you are new to Photoshop or new to compositing. First thing we're going to do is go here to Workspace, and we want to go down to Photography. So that's going to be the workspace that we're starting from. When you're doing compositing, you're essentially combining various photographs in order to create the illusion that a new photograph or a new image exists. So let's go ahead and click on that, and you can see that changed what elements are showing here and also what tools are showing here. And that's true for all these workspaces. As I click on them, you'll see that my user interface changes. You can also access these over here. So if I click on this guy here, I can change my workspace without having to go to my top menu there. So I'm going to go to Photography, and there's a few things I want to change here just to make my life a little bit easier when it comes to compositing. So first is, when you're doing compositing, the palette, meaning the information that you need outside of the image itself, is going to be your tools, which are present over here on the left, your options bar, which is this bar up here, your contextual taskbar down here, and then your layers palette, meaning your layers here. These other elements are pretty much optional, and if there is something that's optional, the best place for it to live is kind of on this sidebar here. With this, when you click it, it opens it. You can click it again to close it. So this is kind of a good drawer for any palettes that you might need, but which you're not going to use right away. So for example, this adjustments palette, I can take it and just drag it by the tab, and anywhere where it starts to appear blue, that's another place I can dock it inside the user interface. So I'm just going to put that there. I'm also going to put that there. I want to give my layers palette as much real estate as possible. And you'll see as I start adding layers that this will start getting longer and longer, representing all the layers in my file. Next thing is up here, I want to show color. So I'm going to go to Window, Color. Now all these under your window in your top menu represent palettes inside of Photoshop. And the ones that have a check mark are the palettes that are currently open. So you can see my layer palette is open and my histogram palette is open. Also down here is where you're going to see the option to turn on or off the various other elements of your user interface. So the application frame, the options, which is this options bar up here, your tools, which are your tools here, and the contextual taskbar, which is this taskbar down here. So in this case, I want to turn on color, and you're going to see that appear here. I'm going to take this and put it up here. Now you'll notice I can add it as a additional tab here. And that's where I want it to be. Now, another thing that I like to do is change this to color wheel. This gives me more information, especially if you're not super familiar with color. This gives you a good idea of which channel you need to adjust in order to get the color that you want. So for example, we're working in an RGB file, meaning red, green, and blue. So I know that the opposite of red is cyan, the opposite of blue is yellow, and the opposite of green is magenta. And when it comes to manipulating colors or even doing a color grade, that information is good to have visually available to me. Okay, so this is my basic workspace. As I work, I may add more palettes, but the most important thing is I want to have my layers here. I want the layers to have as much real estate as possible, and I'll usually have my color here or histogram. But having them both on a tab there, I can access either one. And then obviously the other thing that's very important is having all your tools available. Now, in order to adjust which tools are shown here, you can go here to Edit Toolbar, and you can drag any tools from the right to the left and vice versa. Now you might be wondering, well, why wouldn't you want to have all your tools shown? And the reason, or the best reason, at least in my case, is that all your tools have a single letter shortcut, which you're going to see over here. So for example, the move tool is V. Now, as you're working, if you have two tools that have the same shortcut, you either have to use Shift for one of them, or you have to toggle through all the tools that have that shortcut. And the faster you're working in Photoshop and the better you get at using the tools, the more you're going to find this is quite annoying, and you'd rather just have one shortcut for the tools that you use the most. And you'll also find there's certain tools that you just never really use. So what's the point of having them inside your menu bar? So I'm going to show you for myself which tools I don't use often enough to justify being in my toolbar. I will mention here that if it's in your tool, if it's not in your toolbar, meaning if you've moved it to the extra tools column, they're still available to you. You just have to click on those three dots and then you'll have all the other tools. So you can still select them at any time. They're just not cluttering up your workspace. Okay, so for the first one, I prefer just having one shortcut for the move tool. It's the tool that you're going to be on the most. It's kind of your default tool in Photoshop. So I'm going to move this out. Rectangular marquee, those are both fine. I use them all the time. For the lasso tool, I really just use the lasso tool. So I'm going to drag this whole thing over here and then just drag the lasso tool back. For object selection, those are fine. For the crop tool, I just want my primary crop tool. So I'm going to get rid of the perspective crop there. Same with eyedropper. I just want my eyedropper tool. For these healing tools, they kind of belong in one block. So I'm going to put them together. What that means is this little triangle appears. And if I select that, I'll have more than one tool in that block. So all these J tools. Now this one, content aware move, I don't use that often, so I'm going to get rid of it. Same with the pencil tool. I pretty much just use the brush tool. Same with clone stamp. I pretty much just use clone stamp. I can leave these, although to be fair, I've never used a history brush tool. I have used the art history brush, so maybe I'll just leave that one. I don't use the adjustment brush tool. It's basically the same as creating a mask for your adjustment layer, which I already have workflows to do that rapidly in Photoshop. Okay, eraser tool. I just want my primary eraser tool. Gradient is fine. These are fine. These can all be in one block. And for the type tool, I'm just going to keep my primary type tool. Pen tool is fine. Although this freeform pen tool, I don't use it enough, so I'm just going to put my pen tool there. All right, everything else is okay. Now I'm going to turn this on, disable shortcuts for hidden toolbar extras. And the reason I'm turning that off is, as I mentioned earlier, with this turned on, these different tools here will not activate when I use my single letter shortcut. All right, let's hit done here. One other thing I want to do is go into my settings, and I'm going to adjust a couple things in here. So first, let's go down to interface. I think everything here is fine. Let's go to workspace. Everything's fine. Notifications. I don't need the tooltips. So this basically, as I hover over things, it's going to give me a whole bunch of information. I'm just going to enable quiet mode. That's going to turn those off. And then same for tooltips here. I'm going to disable the gestures. I'm also going to turn off this use shift key for tool switch. That means I don't have to hold down shift if I'm switching tools. So if, for example, I want to go from my marquee, rectangular marquee to elliptical marquee, I just have to hit the M key twice. Okay, let's see if there's anything else here. I think that's fine. Under file handling, I think everything here is fine. You do want to make sure you have automatically save recovery information. You can set this to how often you want to do it, but in the case that Photoshop crashes, you want to make sure you don't lose everything you've done. So depending on, how confident you are in Photoshop and also how buggy your software is being, you may want to set this to 5 minutes versus 10 minutes. For me, I think 10 minutes is fine. That's the default. Okay, and I think that's it. Everything else we can pretty much leave as is. If you do have a faster scratch disk, if you have an SSD drive, you may want to use that as your scratch disk, especially if you have more space on it. That'll make your Photoshop go faster. Okay. All right, I think everything else we're going to leave as is, so let's hit OK. And now we have our workspace set up. We're ready to dive into some compositing. And just a quick overview, what is compositing? Compositing is combining two or more images together in order to create a new image. And with compositing, you're trying to sell the illusion that the image you're creating is an original image, meaning it's something that was photographed. It's not something that you pasted together. If you can see those seams, if you can see that it's pasted together, if you can see that these are not the same photograph, then you are breaking that illusion that you're trying to create. So when it comes to working with Photoshop, a lot of the skill is in those fine details to make something look like it really is all one photograph. Okay, so let's go ahead and start working on this. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the crop of this image. Give ourselves a little more room to add the second element into this photograph. So let's go to our crop tool. Another thing to realize is all the tools do have a single letter shortcut. And if I hover over these, you can see in my rich tooltip there what that single letter shortcut is. So for the crop tool, it is C on your keyboard. That'll put you into the crop tool. Now you'll notice that created this frame around here that I can drag. And also anytime you change tools, notice your options bar up here will change. So this will show me all the options for my crop tool. If I'm on the move tool, it'll change to options for my move tool. All right, back onto the crop tool. Here, I'm going to change this to a 4:5 ratio. And I want to change this to generative expand. So with generative expand, it's essentially going to add information to my file using generative AI, right? So here it's saying it's going to use generative AI to fill that missing space. So I want to do something like this, where we push him a little bit lower in the frame so we can add our fish up here. And Photoshop's AI is now going to take the information in here and generate what should be out here in this white space. And for something like this, where, you know, it's just nature, it usually does a really good job, because it's not having to add people or do anything real complicated. It's just taking information that's in the background and extending it further. And you can see we've got 3 options here. We can take a look at these, see which one we like the best. Honestly, they're all serving their purpose just fine. So I think we'll just stick with the first one. Okay, so now you can see I have 2 layers. I have my background, and then I have this new generative expand layer. And you'll also see that this has a second little thumbnail next to the layer itself, and this is called a mask. And a mask in Photoshop is a black and white layer attached to your color layer or to your primary layer that defines what you see and what you don't see. So whatever's white in the mask is what you see. Whatever is black is basically transparent. So if I turn off this layer below, you can see that this black box in my mask is going to a transparent background. Now, if I turn that on, it's obviously no longer transparent, and it's showing through to the layer below it. Now, for this use case scenario, I don't need 2 layers, so I could just merge these into one. To do that, you can go up to your layers, and you can go merge down, which is Command E. And while we're here, you should notice that when you're using Photoshop and you go to your top menu here, all the commands that have a shortcut are going to be listed on the right side here. So as you're working in Photoshop, you want to learn all these shortcuts. So if I go here and I see that merge down is Command E, rather than using the command here, I'm going to go Command E on my keyboard and merge those 2 together. Okay, so now we have 1 layer again. And the next thing we're going to do is bring in our fish. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and we're going to open this fish file. Okay, so here we have a fish, and we want to pull this fish into our other file. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to get rid of this black background. Now, because this background has virtually no detail, Photoshop's going to do a really good job with the tools inside to get rid of this. Now, I'm going to click here for Remove Background, but before I do that, there's one other thing I want to look for in my settings. So let's go to Settings, and let's go down to, I believe it's Image Processing. Okay, so here, select Subject and Remove Background. Right now, it's using Device, meaning it's processing the or using the AI that's on my device and not sending this to the cloud to process using Adobe's AI engine. Now, I found that using Adobe's AI engine, if you can, meaning you have a good internet connection, is going to get you much better results than the device. So I'm going to click on Cloud there and remove tool processing. I want to go put these all on more stable. So they might not be as fast, but I'm going to get better results. So I'm going to hit OK there, and then I'm going to use Remove Background. Now, Remove Background is going to cut this out using a mask. So the great thing about this is I can always hit Shift and turn off my mask and see my original image, but it has been cut out. Now, another thing you're going to notice here is these blue highlights and this transform box. Those allow you to scale your image or rotate your image. I'm going to go ahead and click escape so that I'm not committing this. And you can turn that on or off here. Personally, I don't like having it on. I feel these blue boxes, especially on hover and things like that, just become annoying. So I'm going to turn this off. I'm also going to go to this little gear and turn all these off. Okay, so now you might be wondering, well, what if I do need to scale this or rotate it? Well, to do that, you're going to go to File or Edit, sorry, and then Free Transform. And the shortcut for that is Command T. So rather than going up to the menu, all you're going to do is Command T, and now you have that box available to you to make any transform scales and so forth. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit escape again. What I want to do now is I want to get rid of this kind of black edge. Because this was on a black background, obviously those edges are reflecting the background that was there before, but I'm pulling it into an image that has a pretty light background. So I'm going to go ahead and go down here and add a solid color. And I'm going to make this solid color basically kind of a light gray, and I'm going to hit OK. And then in my layer palette, I'm going to drag this so that it's underneath my fish layer. And now you can see that kind of darker edge along here. We want to get rid of that as best as we can. Now there's a couple things we can try. The first one is if we delete this layer mask, and let's go to our object selection tool, which is this one here, and we can just say select subject up here. And you can see that's made a selection. Now, rather than immediately creating a mask, I'm going to go into the Select and Mask workspace. So with the Select and Mask workspace, you have a space dedicated to making selections. So here, if I put this on a white background and then turn up the opacity to 100, I get a good idea of my selection and I can start making some adjustments to it. Now right away you can see it basically looks exactly the same as when I selected it and made or just used the remove background command. But in here I have a few things that I can use to adjust it further. So the first one is down here under edge detection. I can turn on some radius and that'll look around 4 pixels either way for any detail that it might have missed. And then the other thing I can do is I can shift my edge inward so that it's kind of cutting into the mask there. And that's going to help get rid of that slightly dark edge around my fish. All right, I'm going to hit OK. And now, right now, it's just a selection. When you see these running ants, that means you have something selected. So we need to add a mask. So to add a mask, go to this little icon and click on it. And it's going to add a mask with whatever you had selected showing in the mask and everything else hidden, meaning black. All right, then we're going to convert this to a smart object. What that does is it puts it in one layer without the mask, but I can always double click in here and then adjust my mask again if I want to. So kind of nests it into a single object. All right, and then with Photoshop, I can just drag this into this file using my move tool. I can also grab the layer itself and drag it into this file. All right, let's go ahead and place our fish. I'm going to do Command T for transform, rotate him so that his eyes are horizontal. And then I'm going to make him quite a bit bigger here. And I want him kind of in front of these mountains here so that it looks like the man and the fish are looking at each other. So something like this. All right, and having done that, the next thing we need to do is get this fish looking like it belongs in here. Now Photoshop did add this harmonize tool, which is supposed to be designed for that. So let's go ahead and try that first. What this is going to do is it's going to generate a new layer with adjusted lighting and adjusted color for how Photoshop thinks this fish should fit into the rest of this scene. Now, I've had mixed results with this. Sometimes it's really good, sometimes the result is not great, and you're better off just doing it manually. But let's go ahead and see what kind of results we're going to get. Okay, not bad. I do like what it's doing there in terms of adjusting the kind of transparency there so it looks like we're seeing through the fish. Let's go ahead and look at these as well. This one also added a bit of shadow there. I'm not crazy about that. Okay, this one did something interesting. It feels a little more backlit. Of these, I think this one is probably the nicest. So let's go ahead and keep that one. The other thing I do want to do here is you'll notice if I look at this mask, and I can do that by holding down Option and clicking on the mask, it's adding this shadow here, and there's also a little bit of edging there. I'm not crazy about any of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the layer mask on here and then hold down Option and use this layer to clip this layer. So now this layer is using the transparency of this layer to get rid of anything around it, essentially. Okay, there's a few other things that I do want to do here. One is I want to add a shadow underneath this fish. Now, right now, Photoshop was trying to add the shadow here, but to me, that's too close. I want this fish to feel like it's really large and far enough away that they're kind of looking at each other. So if I'm going to add a shadow to the ground here, I need to have my subject here, my man, on his own layer. So to do that, I'm going to go to my object selection tool and just make a selection around my man here. And that's done a good job. Now we can go to layer and we can go to new layer via copy. And this is one of these tools that you're going to use a lot in Photoshop. So best to remember the shortcut, it's Command J. So when you have a selection and you want to put that selection on its own layer, do Command J. All right, we can name our layer by double clicking on the title and then typing whatever name we want. Okay, so then underneath my man, I'm going to add a shadow layer. So I'm going to go ahead and just make an elliptical selection kind of under where I would want that fish's shadow to be. So probably somewhere right around there. And then I'm going to add a curve adjustment layer. So with an adjustment layer, you're basically adjusting the colors or the lightness and darkness or the balance or whatever it is of all the layers below it in the layer stack. And you can control which parts of the image with your mask. So in this case, I'm going to make this part darker by pulling my curve down. You can see that's creating a shadow for our fish. Now, obviously it's way too sharp, but we can go to the properties of our mask here and add some feather to the mask. So something like this. And we can probably go even a little darker. Okay, and the beauty of this is I can do Command T with my mask selected and make this a little bigger if I want to, or even move where it is. Okay, and then one other trick when it comes to shadows. So you'll often see little highlights like this, and those are reflections of the sun. So even if there's shadow here, you would still see those kind of highlights. So in Photoshop, if we double click on a layer, we're going to get these blending options down here. And with our blending options, we can say anything that is below our layer that's pure white, I don't want this shadow to affect it. So if I start dragging this to the left, you'll see those little highlights start to have no shadow on them. So just enough so that you see those highlights is probably good right there. And if we zoom in, you'll see that there are there's no feathering there. And that doesn't look good. So what we're going to do is hold down Option, kind of break this apart. And then you can see we now have some feathering happening there. So just like that. Okay, so that makes that shadow look far more realistic. And like I mentioned earlier, it's these small things when it comes to compositing that make a huge difference to what the final outcome looks like and whether you're selling that illusion of this being just one photo. Okay, I also don't like how sharp it is right here, so I'm going to just go onto my curve layer here, or my mask, and with a black brush. So I'm going to go on my brush tool, make sure my foreground color here is black, because I'm going to paint black into my mask. And then if I right mouse click, I can select the brush. And for this, I want a soft round brush like this. I'm going to make my brush much bigger. So something like this. And then I'm going to turn the flow on the brush down so that each time I paint, it's only putting down 30%. And then I can click this a few times, kind of soften that edge there. And that looks really good. Okay, next thing I want to do is I do want my character to really stand out. So one thing that you can do that'll help in that regard is to add some atmosphere between your subject and the background. So to do that, I'm going to go here. And I also want this fish to be in the background of the man. So I'm going to take these two layers that make the fish and put them underneath my man there. And then this, I'm going to put above the fish, but below the man. And here, I'm going to take my elliptical marquee and kind of just make a shape behind him. Now, if I hold down Option, I'm going to be scaling this from the center rather than from the edge, which always feels a little counterintuitive to me. So hold down Option, just like so. And I want this to be a little bit in front of the fish as well. So something like this. And then I'm going to go to my eyedropper tool, which is I on your keyboard right there. Just select the color of this in the background. Now you'll notice as I'm moving around, my color is changing dramatically. That's your sample size here. You want to put this probably on 5x5 or 11x11. Now my color doesn't shift as much when I move around. Okay, so that's about the right color there. And here, actually, before I even add this atmosphere, I'm just going to add a solid color layer, which I can do here. And the solid color layer will default to what your foreground color is. So that's why I made that selection first. All right, let's hit OK. And now I'm going to go double click on my mask. And it's going to ask me, do I want to enter select and mask, or do I want to view properties? I find viewing properties is always what I want. So I'm going to click on view properties. And then here I can add feathering. And I'm going to add feathering until you cannot see any edge anymore. And it just feels like a little bit of atmosphere back there. And then I can obviously take my opacity down so it's not so strong. And there you can see before and after. It just helps my main character stand out a bit. Okay, next thing I want to do is I want to move the redness of my fish down a bit. So if I select my harmonized layer, you'll notice that it has these kind of 2 stars on it. That means it's a dynamic AI layer. If I right mouse click on this and go down to rasterize, it'll turn it into a pixel layer. And with a pixel layer, I can make more adjustments to it. So I'm going to do Command U, which will bring up my hue saturation. You can go here, image adjustments, and get to hue saturation, but the shortcut is Command U. So that's the better and faster route. I'm going to select my reds and just take the opacity on this down, or sorry, the saturation. Maybe move it just a little bit more toward kind of a yellowish color. Actually, I'm going to leave the color pretty much where it is. Just take the saturation down a bit. Okay, and similarly, I want to take this color of my ground and move it a little bit closer to the orange of the fish. Just kind of unify my colors a bit. So I'm going to go here, add another hue saturation, but in this case, I'm doing it as an adjustment layer, so I can correct it if I want. And I'm going to click on this little guy here. So this allows me to target a specific color inside my image. I'm going to grab just kind of this color here and then start moving my hue until it gets more reddish. So more similar to the color of my fish. Just like that. Okay, then the other thing I want to do here is, because everything kind of here in the foreground is red, maybe adding some blue or even this color here into my subject will help make him stand out a little bit. So I'm going to select my man layer up here, and if I go to my object selection tool, go down to select people and select him, I now have these options for making masks based on different parts of him. So here I can select his coat, hit apply. It's made a selection of his coat, and now I can go here to my curves and add a curve layer, and that selection of his coat will be built into the mask. I'm going to zoom in here. I want to be able to see this color here and this. And now I'm going to start making some adjustments. Now, because I want to change color, I have to go into my channels. If you're not comfortable with using channels, you can also do this with hue saturation, although you can get much more accurate results with using a curve. So in this case, I know I want to move it more toward a greenish color and probably a little bit more toward a bluish color. So I've got my blue channel that I can work with, green, and my red. So red will give me more cyan. So let's push that towards cyan. And my green will obviously give me a little more green. And then my blue should push this a little more toward blue. So now this is starting to look a little bit more like that. I like it. I do need to make the whole thing a little bit lighter, I think. And then maybe a little bit even more cyan. And maybe a little bit more blue as well. Okay, so color-wise, I think that looks good. Now, having done that, you'll notice that his hand is in that mask and it shouldn't be. So if we select the mask here and go onto our brush tool and then make our brush really small here, we can also interactively adjust our brush size by holding down Control and Option and dragging left and right. And then up and down will change our feather of our brush. Okay, and then I want my flow to be back to 100, and I'm just going to paint this out of the mask. So it's only his jacket that's getting the color change there. And we'll do the same here. Just make sure this is only the jacket. All right, that looks good. And you can see now we're still kind of using this two color palette. So we've got this kind of color and then the more orange, which is nice. When you're doing composites, you kind of want to limit the colors. It's just going to help you get a nicer image. Okay, so having done that, I do think our fish needs to be rotated just a little more. So I'm going to take both the layers that make the fish, do Command T for transform. And if you turn this on here, you get an anchor point. And with an anchor point, wherever you place it, that's where it's going to scale or rotate from. So in this case, if I kind of put it where the mouth of the fish is and then rotate, that's where it's going to rotate from. So something like this. I am seeing this color here, so I'm just going to scale this a bit while holding down Option. So that's no longer in my image there. The other thing I want to do, this will just help add to the realism, is add a little bit of reflection in this eye of this same environment. So if I take this environment here, and I'm going to go ahead and also grab that hue saturation layer, kind of drag, well, first I need to do Command J to make a copy of my background. Now I can take this and this, hold down Option and just drag them. That'll make a copy of them, and then I can do Command D to merge it together. I'm going to drag this to the top here and do Command T for transform. Start making this way, way, way smaller. So it's going to be a reflection inside the eye of this fish. Now, will you see it? No, not really, but you'll see a hint of it. And that's going to be enough to help sell the illusion. So while it's here, I'm going to put this on screen so I can see kind of the fisheye underneath it. And then I'm going to turn on this warp so that I can kind of make this a little more circular, like it would be if it was inside the eye of the fish. Okay, and then I'm going to do Command M, or Image Adjustments Curves, and I want to basically get rid of all this kind of darker part so that it's basically just the highlight there. And then I'm going to turn this off temporarily and make a selection of just the eye portion here. So something like this, and you'll notice that this is kind of rotated. You can transform just your selection by right mouse clicking and going to Transform Selection. And then I can rotate just the selection without rotating any pixels. All right, then I'm going to turn this back on and add a mask to it. I'm going to go into my mask, add some feathering, and then take the opacity on this down quite a bit until there's just a hint of it. So something like this. Maybe a little bit more. And then in my mask, I'm going to paint just black kind of along here so that that highlight is normalized mostly to just that spot. So super subtle there, and we can take the opacity down even further, but that small little detail there is going to help sell the overall illusion of this composite. So I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing I want to do is I want to bring something into the foreground to just give my whole image a little more depth. So I'm going to go to File, Open. I'm going to grab this image of some plants or some grass. I'm going to go to my crop tool. Because I'm pulling this into another image, I want these to end. And I don't want to paint the endings in. Instead, I'm just going to use some AI to extend this. So if I go onto my crop tool, put this on Generative Expand, you'll see that it's still trying to use this 4x5. If you right mouse click and say Reset Crop, it'll reset the crop to your original size. I'm going to make this a little taller, a little wider, and then go ahead and hit that check mark. And it's going to generate in this and hopefully generate in the top of this grass so that I have a clean grass to cut out. So this is perfect. I'm going to do Command D to merge that into my background. And then if I go into my Move tool here, I'm going to get my Remove Background. I'm going to click on that. And then I'm going to right mouse click and make sure I'm right mouse clicking on the layer, not the mask. And then I'm going to convert this to a smart object. Then I'm going to drag this into my file here. Another thing I noticed here is if I click here, you'll notice I'm changing which layer I'm selecting. I don't like that behavior. It's right here. I'm just going to turn that off. Now, if I do need to select a layer by clicking on it, If I just hold down Command with my Move tool activated, it'll temporarily activate that behavior so I can click and select this layer. But then if I let go and I accidentally go here to move this, I'm not selecting the layer behind it. Okay, so next thing we need to do is we need to adjust the color of this and also the black point. You'll see our black point here, meaning the darkest point, is much lighter than the black point here. So we're going to adjust both of those things. First, we'll do Command M to bring up our curve and just adjust our black point here. And then I'm going to do Command U and move this toward that background color. So something like this. All right, and then I'm going to do Command T for transform, make this quite a lot bigger. And I want a few of the strands to go in front of my subject and also a few to go kind of in front of the fish in the sky there. So when you're doing compositing, especially photo compositing, the more you can get elements to overlap each other, the more realistic your composite is going to be. So in this case, we're putting this on top of our fish, and our fish is on top of our background, and our shadow is behind our man, right? So all these various layers, and this is why layers are so important, is going to help sell the illusion that this is one photograph and not something that you kind of composited together. Okay, so next, because this is so close to the camera now, I want it to be blurry. And to do that, I'm just going to go here, Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. And we can see how much of this effect is going to look in our image. You can see even at 9.7, it's still a little too in focus. So I'm thinking probably right around there. And having done that, I feel like this should be darker. So I'm going to go into my curve here and just adjust this to be even darker. And that looks good. Okay, final steps is I want to add a few elements on top of the whole image to make it feel, again, like it's all one photograph. So first, I'm going to go ahead and add just a layer here, and we're going to call this Vignette. And I'm going to go onto my gradient tool. I want to go on Classic Gradient. And then here, I want to grab this Foreground to Transparent. So this will go to whatever my foreground color is to Transparent. I want to make sure I'm on Linear. And then I'm going to hold down Option, which will allow me to select colors. And I kind of want to select the darkest color in the sky here. So there, and then I can push this even darker. I'm going to add some of that color coming in from here and here. And then I'm going to grab the darkest color down here and have that coming in from the bottom like so. And maybe even darker blue kind of color coming in here and here. Okay, I'm going to put this on Multiply. And then the other thing I want to do here is I want to add a film grain layer. And this is a relatively new addition to Photoshop. But by having this as an adjustment layer, I can put it on top of all my other layers and kind of normalize the film grain. Because without this on, you'll see there's a certain film grain in this image here, but anywhere where I've added like this fish or even this fade in the background, it no longer has that film grain. So by adding a layer on top, I can make everything look like it has the same amount of film grain. And I like to turn this roughness down a bit. Okay, and then final touch is we could also add just a bit of a kind of color grade on top of everything. So to do that, I'm just going to add one more curve layer. In here, I'm going to go to my blue channel, just lift up the blues in the shadows so we get kind of like this very, very dark blue black, and then pull it back down here so we also get just a little bit of warmth in all of our highlights. Kind of gives it a nice vintage look. So there you have it. That's kind of the basics of compositing. Essentially, you're combining photographs, you're trying to create three-dimensional depth. So adding elements to the foreground, to the middle ground, using atmosphere to separate from your background, and then using selections and color adjustments to make everything feel like it belongs together. So there you have it. That is your primer on compositing inside of Photoshop. And hopefully through this, you learned some tips, tricks, and techniques that you can use in your own projects. Now, if you did enjoy it, please subscribe to my channel, turn on your notifications, leave a like, leave a comment on what other tutorials you'd like to see. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial, this is a precursor to a live compositing session that I'm going to be doing in a couple of weeks with a much more advanced project. But you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions and get answers in real time. So if that's interesting to you, I'll include a link below of how you can join that session. It is paid for, so you either need to be a member of the Academy or have purchased the masterclass in order to attend. I'll include links to both below. Otherwise, here's some other tutorials you can check out, and I will see you next time.